On October 15th, 2022, I packed up all of my stuff, gave up my apartment, and moved to Europe. Now I'm living here in Madeira, Portugal, which is an island about 1,000 kilometers off the coast of Portugal. And I wanted to make this video because it had been almost 3 years since before the pandemic that I was living this kind of lifestyle. So I had gotten really used to living back in the United States. And so I just wanted to share what this first month has been like, some of the pros and cons, the ups and downs, so that hopefully it can help you if you're making a similar decision in your life, whether that's to go fully nomadic or just relocate to another country. The first thing that I noticed when I became nomadic again was just the sheer happiness that I felt, like feeling of adventure, feeling of being totally free in the world, and feeling of just not knowing what to expect. Like, daily life, especially during the pandemic, started to feel pretty monotonous. Even though I work for myself and work from home, you can kind of get into this little Groundhog Day sort of feeling. And so it was really nice to just kind of feel like, okay, the world is your oyster and anything can happen. And that's a feeling that I've had the entire time I've been over here. It's probably partly the honeymoon stage of traveling again and living abroad, but it's certainly one of the reasons why we do it, right? We want to feel that excitement and that zest for life. I've been in Amsterdam, I've been in Lisbon, and now I'm here in Madeira. And I've been moving a little bit too fast, which I'll talk about in a minute, but it's just been really nice to be in different cultures again, to be able to eat different foods and just be in a different environment and have beautiful scenery everywhere and meet new people. All of that stuff has just been great, and that is definitely one of the things that I was most looking forward to and kind of missing in my life from before the pandemic started through staying kind of on lockdown for a while and then getting back out there. Another thing that was a pleasant surprise was being able to lower my cost of living significantly, especially compared to Miami, where I was living before this. I think that I have cut my cost of living in half, or maybe it's a third of the price of what I was spending in South Florida. Now, granted, South Florida is one of the most expensive places to live in the US, but yeah, for that price and that cost of living, I realized that I could live anywhere in the world. And so, yeah, I know that there's inflation everywhere, but it has been really nice to be able to just right off the bat save thousands of dollars per month on rent, utilities, food, and just general expenses. One of the things that I noticed before the pandemic was that I lived out of a backpack and a suitcase, so I really didn't have that much stuff. But since the pandemic started, I ended up getting an Amazon credit card where I've been spending $500 or $600 a month just buying stuff on Amazon. But in the nomadic lifestyle, you can't carry that much stuff with you, so you end up just buying less things. And now that credit card, I haven't used it in 2 months since I bought boxes to pack up all of my stuff. So it's having access to buy stuff and having a house to put stuff in, you just end up getting more stuff and filling up your house. But whenever you have to downsize and minimize everything, then you end up just naturally spending less money. So not only is the cost of what you buy less, but you just buy less. And so it's kind of like a double benefit to, ironically, moving to another country, just being able to save a lot of money. Let's say that you go out to dinner in the US and you spend $40 or $50 per person plus tax. If you are living in Portugal, you might spend 15 to 30 euro per person, and then there's not as high of a tip over here. So tipping is optional. So even if you spend 8% or 10% tip compared to 20% in the US, you're spending half the price to go out to dinner, and then you're also saving an extra 10% that would normally go to a tip. So it's you start to save money from all of these different expenses combined. And even if it's something as simple as your internet bill, whether your internet is just wrapped into your rent if you're renting a furnished place, or if you're spending $30 a month on internet versus $90 a month in the US. So all of these little things add up. Hopefully this isn't too windy, but another thing that I really have been enjoying and that I didn't really think about that much until I got here was the slower pace of life that is so palpable, especially here in Madeira. I mean, obviously this is a vacation and holiday destination, so it's a bit different from living in Lisbon, for example, but you definitely feel that people have a better quality of life here. There's less hustle and bustle. There's less of like a hurried mentality, and you'll see people like just sipping a coffee or a glass of wine or something during the day. And that's something that I definitely enjoy about Europe in general, but especially Madeira Island. If you're an entrepreneur or if you're a freelancer who works from home and you just want a really nice place to be able to work in peace and quiet from home, and then be able to walk out your front door and just go for a walk on the seafront, I mean, it's really hard to beat that. And I've been really enjoying having my apartment here with a view of the ocean and of the sunset every day for, again, a fraction of the price of what that would cost in Miami. I mean, it would probably be 4 or 5 times as much rent to be able to live in an equivalent location this close to the waterfront in the US or Canada. Another thing that also increases your quality of life is not needing a car, and especially coming from Florida, which is very car dependent, it's been amazing to be able to walk or take public transport everywhere, and it's super affordable too. You can spend maybe 30 or 40 euro per month on a metro pass and a couple euro every time you hop in an Uber, so I've really been enjoying that as well. Another thing that I absolutely love about living in Europe is being like 6 to 9 hours ahead of the US time zones, because it allows you to do whatever you want during the day and not have to worry about being awake for an 8 a.m. Zoom meeting. And so I love that you can take the day off, or you can do deep focused work on like real work projects before hopping into meetings and phone calls. So a lot of the people I've met here have been really happy that they can have their daily or weekly calls at like 3 to 5 p.m. or even 6 or 7 p.m. instead of like 7 or 8 a.m. There are also certain things that have become better or easier since last time I was a nomad, and one of those things is the internet speed. So before the pandemic, you might be stuck in an Airbnb somewhere with like 5 megabits per second internet, but on this trip, I really haven't seen anything less than 20 or 30 megabits up to 300. And so that has definitely been a pleasant surprise, and it allows you to be able to work from anywhere, whether you attach to your phone's hotspot or have just decent internet at your rental property. Right now I'm renting through a site called Flat.io, which specializes in having medium-term rentals for expats and digital nomads and long-term travelers, and all of the properties are fully furnished and fully equipped, and they even have the internet speed listed on the property listing. So before you rent, you know how fast the internet is. So that makes it a lot faster and easier to sift through properties and filter for the ones that you really like. So if you want to check out some properties by Flat.io, I will drop a link in this video's description, and happy house hunting. Another thing that has been noticeably different is how many more foreigners I've noticed walking around compared to pre-pandemic. So the good news is it makes it a lot easier to meet people. The bad news could be that, you know, it's putting upward pressure on prices. There have been a lot of stories about how like 8,000 Americans moved to Portugal during the pandemic, and that like Americans are ruining Portugal and things like that. I think it's not that big of an impact that it's changing like Portuguese culture or anything like that. I think it's more of a positive because you're just seeing people from around the world living there. It is a bit different. Like, you hear English being spoken more often, which is a benefit for me because I don't speak Portuguese, but sometimes I feel bad for the locals to always have to be speaking English if there's like lots of tourists in their establishment. But then again, it's also bringing in extra income as well. So I guess it's kind of like two sides to that story. But as a traveler myself, and even I think as locals, it's easier now to meet people from around the world, especially in a place like Lisbon or Madeira, where you can have potentially hundreds, if not thousands, of foreigners, retirees, digital nomads all living here. It creates an additional community, and so there's just more things to do. There's more ways to meet people than there were before. Like here in Madeira, they have the Digital Nomad Village, which definitely didn't exist before the pandemic, but now as soon as you land on the plane, you have like an instant group of a couple hundred friends where you can do things like go work out together, go on hikes together, go to dinners together, go to co-working lunches together. I mean, there's so many activities and things to do. Whale watching, art galleries, DJs and parties. It's like there's this whole nother world of things to do, things to get involved in, people to meet. And it's a much richer experience now having these extra people versus feeling like you're kind of alone in this lifestyle. So let's talk about the downsides though, because nothing is perfect. Even this quite optimal lifestyle of being location independent. And I think the first shock or the first thing that was a challenge for me was the language barrier. Now, where I landed in the Netherlands in Amsterdam, everyone speaks English, so it's really easy to get around and talk with people regardless of what country you're from. A lot of people have that language in common, but it's quite different here in Portugal. I don't know what exact percent of the population speaks English, and I don't think that locals should be expected to speak any other language other than the official language of their country, obviously. But it's definitely harder to communicate. And even though I speak Spanish because I studied Spanish and I lived in Spanish-speaking countries for so many years, it's definitely been hard for me to face that I don't speak Portuguese, and I'm probably not going to learn because it's a really difficult language and I don't know how long I'll be here for. So I really wish that I did speak more Portuguese other than hello and good morning and thank you. You know, without speaking the language, it's hard to ever feel completely integrated into a society. And so I think it's something really important, but it's also something that's very hard to do, especially if you're just passing through and you're not going to be here forever. Another thing that has been difficult for me that I wrote about in my book, Digital Nomads For Dummies, because it's something that I noticed a lot of people struggling with in the past, is getting into a good flow and routine when you land in a new place. So if you're moving somewhere long term and you're going to be there for years, then it's not as hard of an adjustment to kind of get into a new daily routine and feel at home somewhere. But if you're changing locations every couple of weeks or every month or so, then you always have what I call digital nomad startup costs. So this is the cost of planning your next destination, of packing, of unpacking, of finding housing, of getting adjusted, of getting to know your surroundings. And on this particular trip, because I wanted to see so much of Portugal really fast, I've been changing locations every 2 to 3 weeks. And that is a pretty high ask if you're working full-time and you also want to be able to enjoy the place that you are. So if you work 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week, 60 hours a week, and you're traveling at the same time, that doesn't leave much time for sleeping, sightseeing, socializing, rest and relaxation, getting exercise. And so today is a Sunday. I'm taking a day off. I'm still filming a video, but yesterday I missed a hike with a lot of nomads here on the island, and I was working for the rest of the day on a Saturday. So keep that in mind when you're going to travel someplace, that it's going to take you some time to get adjusted. And so the longer you stay, the more you have time to get into a better work-life balance compared to if you're changing locations every month. So by the time you start to feel acclimated, it's time to move again. So it's like you have your brain kind of turns into vacation mode at first until you remember, oh wait, this is regular life. So that has been a bit of a struggle for me. I'm still adapting and acclimating to what would be like my status quo from before I started traveling, before experiencing more jet lag and exhaustion from moving around and things like that. Something that I legitimately hate about living in Europe is that it feels like you can smoke anywhere. Now, I've never smoked cigarettes, and I forget that the US and certain countries ban smoking in public places, but that's not as customary in Europe, and especially in Portugal, I've been noticing it everywhere. Now, the EU has been trying to curb smoking in public places since 2009, and there's actually a map, which I'll link to in this video's description, where you can see which countries regulate smoking in public areas and which ones don't, and there's different color-coded countries. Portugal is an orange country, which means it provides limited protection against secondhand smoke, and by limited, like little to none. And so regardless of where you are, whether it's at an outdoor cafe or a coffee shop or a restaurant or a bar or club, it feels like you're surrounded by cigarette smoke. And every time I come home, I have to take a shower because my hair and my clothing smells like smoke. And I guess I've taken that for granted in other places I've lived where either smoking wasn't allowed and so I just didn't notice it, or maybe fewer people smoked. But that's something that I'm still getting used to, and honestly, I would consider not living in a country where smoking is allowed everywhere because it impacts my personal quality of life so much. One thing that's really important when you move to another country is that you want to feel at home where you're staying. And one of the things I've been reminded of since coming to Europe is to be really careful about where you rent a property, because in certain areas that might look very picturesque or might be very interesting to walk or sightsee through, they don't necessarily provide the right environment for working from home and being inside a lot. So if you're in Europe in the summer, you'll notice that very few places have air conditioning. So if you're staying in a place that has really great photos, but then you get there and it's like 20 degrees hotter inside than it is outside because there's no AC or there's no climate control, there's no insulation, that can also be an issue in the winter. Now, most places should have some form of heating, but I've also lived in places in Europe that didn't have any heating, and it felt colder inside of my house than outside because the building was built out of stone or there was no insulation. And so I can remember when I lived in Malta, this was back like 9 years ago, and I would be wearing gloves to type on my computer because my hands were so cold. So those are kind of like things that you don't necessarily think about at first. In a city like Lisbon, for example, that is so big and has such a high population, if you're living in really close quarters with your neighbors, like you can hear people arguing, you can hear people eating next door, like you might be able to, like the walls could be really thin. You also might hear a lot of street traffic, cars honking, dogs barking, music, things like that. And so if that could bother you, then be really particular about where you rent. And I've noticed on this trip that I kind of prefer living like on the outskirts of a city, or living on an island like Madeira, or living in a small town like Bansko, Bulgaria, compared to living like in the heart of a city, whether it's Vancouver or Lisbon or Sofia, Bulgaria. Another thing is FOMO. FOMO is real, whether you're at home or abroad or out traveling. You really can't do it all. You have to prioritize in life, no matter where you're living your life. And that's certainly the case in a digital nomad lifestyle. I've heard some stories from local transplants who said that they went out and partied for the first 3 months that they were here, and then they became complete recluses and like didn't go out of the house and didn't hang out with anyone because they were so burnt out from all of the partying and socializing that they did when they first got here. You know, life is all about choices no matter where you live. And so even if you're living in a really a beautiful place that feels like you're on holiday all of the time, you still have decisions to make, whether that is to work or play, or whether to stay home and sleep, or get up early to meet people for a hike, whether to take a self-care day or go out sightseeing or on a tour. And so I think everyone needs to find that balance for themselves, and I'm still working on finding it for myself as well. In general, though, I'm really glad that I made this decision to come back and travel again. I think it was definitely the right decision for this time in my life, and I'm excited to share these experiences with you. So if you're new to the channel, then make sure to subscribe and turn on the notifications bell, because I'm getting back to regular weekly videos. I have one about the cost of living in Lisbon coming up, a day in my life living here in Madeira, and lots more. So if you have any questions for me about this lifestyle or what my experience has been like here, then let me know in the comments below. And here's some more videos about living abroad that you can catch up on, and see you in the next video.